Welcome to Deep Bear Sleep. There is a particular quality to the light just before a summer storm. It goes golden first, then greenish, then a kind of silver gray that softens every edge in the world, as though someone has drawn a fine cloth across the sun and left just enough light to see by. Just enough to notice how beautiful everything becomes when the air holds its breath. Eleanor had lived beside wheat fields her whole life. 63 years in the same county, the same rolling stretch of farmland her grandmother had once walked in bare feet. She knew the smell of rain before it arrived. She knew the way the wheat moved differently when the wind changed direction. Not the casual, lazy swaying of an ordinary afternoon, but a leaning, a bracing, a kind of collective readiness that rippled across the whole field like a slow exhale. She was sitting on the back porch when she felt it. The wooden steps were still warm from the day. She had a glass of cold water on the railing beside her, an old quilt folded across her lap more out of habit than necessity. The heat of the day had been heavy and thick, the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders and makes every small task feel enormous. But now, at 8:30 in the evening, the air was beginning to shift. She pressed her bare feet flat against the porch boards and felt them. Warm, solid, real. The wheat stretched out before her in every direction, a sea of pale gold, still bright enough to catch the last of the diffused light. Acres and acres of it. The heads were full and heavy with the season, bowing slightly on their long stems, and when the first soft breath of the storm wind moved through them, the sound was extraordinary. A whisper. Thousands and thousands of whispers all at once. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened. The wind came in pulses, each one a little stronger than the last, and each time it came, the wheat answered. A long, soft rush of sound that began at the far edge of the field and rolled toward her like a wave crossing open water. She could hear it coming before it arrived. She could track its progress across the acres, that traveling whisper getting gradually louder, closer, until it washed over her completely, and she felt it on her skin and in her hair, and then it passed, and the field stilled again, and there was only the waiting. She opened her eyes. The sky to the west had turned a remarkable color. Not threatening, never threatening to Eleanor, who had watched 1,000 storms from this same spot, but spectacular in the quiet way that summer storms announce themselves over flat land. A bruised blue along the bottom, shading up through gray into a pale, luminous green that she had always thought looked like the inside of a sea glass bottle held up to the light. Above that, the clouds had stacked themselves into tremendous, slow towers, white at their peaks, dark at their roots, and moving so gradually that you had to look away and look back to be sure they were moving at all. A barn swallow cut low across the field, then another, then a whole chattering company of them swooping and banking in wide arcs, gathering and scattering, gathering again. They always flew like that before a storm. Eleanor had told her daughter this once, and her daughter had laughed, not unkindly, and said she'd read something about birds and barometric pressure. Eleanor had said, yes, that's probably right, and thought, or they simply love it, the way I do. The first sound of distant thunder arrived not as a crack, but as a murmur. A low, rolling, horizontal sound that seemed to come from inside the clouds rather than from any specific place. A sound like a very large, very old door being opened somewhere far away. It traveled across the fields and arrived at the porch as something barely louder than a thought, a feeling as much as a sound, something Eleanor felt in her chest and in the soles of her feet still resting against the warm boards. Then quiet. Then the wheat whispered again, and this time it didn't stop. The wind had steadied itself, not gusting now, but running, a continuous, purposeful movement of air coming from the west, bending the wheat in long, unified ripples that chased each other toward her in an endless procession. The sound of it was oceanic. It was the most calming sound Eleanor knew. She had fallen asleep to it hundreds of times as a child through an open window, her grandmother's voice already gone quiet at the end of the hall, the whole night held up by that sound. The wheat moving in darkness, saying something in a language she had never needed to translate. She pulled the quilt up a little, not because she was cold. The air was still warm, still weighted with the day's heat, though she could feel the first cool fingers of the storm beginning to move through it. She pulled the quilt up because it felt right. Because there is a comfort in being wrapped in something soft when the wide sky is beginning to do something enormous. The lightning came quietly at first, not the sharp, spiked lightning of a nearby strike, but the deep interior kind, the kind that illuminated the clouds from inside. A slow brightening and fading that turned the great towers of cumulus into paper lanterns, brief and luminous, there and then gone. One pulse of light, silence. Another, further south, a softer one. The clouds were talking to each other across distances she couldn't see, passing something wordless and electrical between them. And she watched with the uncomplicated pleasure of someone watching a fire. No analysis, no interpretation, just the seeing of it. The thunder that followed was longer now, more language to it. A low rumble that built and then unrolled itself across the sky in a long, diminishing roll that seemed to travel for miles before it finally gave out somewhere east of her. Somewhere past the old co-op and the water tower, and the edge of everything she could name. She counted, an old habit, and reached 14 before the thunder faded. Miles and miles away still. Plenty of time. All the time in the world to sit here and watch it come. The first real smell of rain arrived before the rain itself. That green, mineral, ancient smell. Petrichor. She had learned the word only a few years ago and had been quietly delighted to find that the thing she'd loved her whole life had a name, though the name seemed too small for it. It came riding on the steady wind, mixing with the dry, grassy smell of the wheat and the warm timber smell of the old porch boards. And Eleanor breathed it in slowly and completely, the way you breathe in something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The barn swallows were gone. The field had changed color entirely. What had been gold was now a deep, moving silver green, the wheat heads flickering pale undersides as the wind combed through them. The quality of the light was unlike any other light. That flat, even, shadowless illumination that only comes from a sky that has become one entire cloud. A sky that is one continuous decision about rain. Eleanor set down her water glass. She tucked both hands inside the quilt, and then she heard it. The rain arriving. Not at her, not yet, but she could hear it in the distance, a sound like static gradually resolving into something more specific, more textured, the individual voices of 10,000 drops becoming audible before she could see them. A hiss, a rushing, a collective soft percussion beginning at the far edge of the western field and moving toward her exactly as the wind had moved, as the wave of whispers had moved, across the open acres at the speed of weather. She watched the rain come across the wheat. You could see it in the field before you felt it. A darkening, a stippling of the pale stalks as the drops hit them. And that sound, that extraordinary sound of rain moving through standing grain, a sound like applause that doesn't stop, like a river relocating itself, like every surface in the world accepting something it needed. The first drops reached her, light on her hands, light on the top of her head, a tapping on the porch railing that was different from the sound on the steps, different again from the sound on the old tin overhang above the woodpile at the side of the house. Every surface had its own note. She had never gotten tired of noticing this. And then the rain was fully present and the sound was everything. The wheat was a roar of soft impact, a continuous white noise that was paradoxically the most restful sound she knew. The porch boards were darkening in uneven patches. A small river was running off the roof in a wavering curtain beyond the railing, hitting the old stone step below with a sound like someone pouring from a height. Far away, the thunder spoke again. Gentler now, more conversational, the way storms sometimes softened once they had made their arrival. Eleanor sat very still. This was the part she had loved since childhood. This being inside the rain without being in the rain. This nearness to something enormous and gentle and entirely indifferent to human worry. The storm didn't know about the things that kept her awake some nights. It didn't know about the appointment she had next Thursday, or the unanswered letter on her kitchen table, or the particular ache in her right hip that had been her companion since February. It simply rained. It simply was. And in its company, all of those things became small. Not gone, not solved, just small. Just the right size. The lightning was closer now, but still courteous, still showing itself as illumination rather than impact. A bright wash of white blue that turned the whole world photographic for one fraction of a second. The rain visible in it as a million silver threads all falling in the same direction. The wheat pressed sideways. The trees at the far fence line suddenly lit and precise, and then gone again. 6 seconds to the thunder. That long, low, rumbling conversation traveling the length of the sky. Eleanor listened to it become silent. She was so still now. Her shoulders had descended at some point without her noticing, released from somewhere near her ears to somewhere lower and softer. Her hands were relaxed inside the quilt. Her breath was slow and even, timed to nothing in particular except her own body's quiet understanding that there was nowhere to be but here. Nothing to do but this. Nothing required of her except to be present to the sound of rain on wheat on a summer evening. The thunder moving east now, already leaving, already becoming the memory of a storm rather than the storm itself. The rain didn't stop all at once. It softened in stages. First, the heaviest drops thinning out, the roar becoming a murmur, the curtain off the roof becoming a drip. Then a longer pause between drops. Then the wheat still audible but quieter, a gentle tapping now rather than a roar, each drop individual and distinct. The smell of wet earth and wet wood and wet grain was extraordinary, denser, deeper, fuller than anything the dry day had offered. The sky to the west had lightened, a thin line of pale silver along the horizon, the place where the storm had come from, which was now clear. The clouds overhead were still low and soft and gray, but they had given what they had. They were moving on, carrying their weight eastward, following the thunder, leaving the field. The last of the rain was barely rain at all, just a presence. A mist that you felt rather than saw. A cool softness in the air that was more memory of storm than storm itself. The wheat stood upright again, or almost. The full, heavy heads bowing a little more than they had before, bowed with water now, quiet now, the million stems individually still. A single sound emerged from somewhere near the fence line. A bird. Eleanor didn't move. She waited, and the bird sang again. 3 ascending notes, and then a pause, and then the 3 notes again, patient and clear and unhurried, as though it had been waiting the whole time for just this quiet. And now here the quiet was, and there was no reason not to sing. Eleanor closed her eyes. The porch boards were cool now beneath her feet. The air smelled of everything the rain had touched. The wheat was still. The thunder was a suggestion somewhere past the eastern horizon, a sound that arrived more as feeling than fact, the rumor of a storm that had already passed. She thought, I have watched 1,000 storms from this porch. She thought, I hope I watch 1,000 more. And then she stopped thinking, because the bird was still singing its 3 ascending notes in the new quiet of the field, and the air was cool and clean against her face, and the quilt was warm across her lap, and there was nothing in the world, not one single thing, that required anything from her in this moment. She let herself grow heavy. Her hands were heavy in her lap. Her shoulders were heavy against the back of the chair. Her feet were heavy and warm, the boards beneath them solid and real and utterly dependable. The birds sang. The wheat was still. The last of the light was leaving, that particular summer dusk blue settling over everything, over the darkened field and the wet fence posts, and the stone step below, and the puddles catching what remained of the sky. Everything blue and silver and soft, and perfectly, entirely, quietly resolved. Eleanor stayed. She had nowhere else to be. There was only this, the clean air, the still field, the distant murmur of the storm finding its way east without her, and the bird at the fence line singing its 3 notes into the blue dusk, again and again, for no reason except that the rain had stopped, and the world was washed, and everything was exactly as it should be. She breathed in. She breathed out. The night came slowly, the way it does after summer rain, gently and without drama, the blue deepening by degrees, the first star appearing so tentatively you couldn't be sure you'd seen it, then a second, then more, pricking through the cleared sky above the eastern tree line where the storm had gone. And Eleanor sat in the middle of all of it, neither asleep nor entirely awake, in that borderland where the body knows it is safe and the mind finally agrees, where the sounds of the world are not demands but companions, where the wheat field and the fading thunder and the singing bird and the smell of rain on earth all become one long, continuous, enveloping thing. A thing that asks nothing. A thing that holds you. A thing that has always been here and will always be here and is, in this moment, more than enough. For more episodes, visit deepbearsleep.com.